Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I rather like the Day of the Nitwits as a headline. I think that sums up Britain in 2021 rather well.
Well, the comparison was with the Day of the Triffids. There's something that people thought was harmless to begin with, and even quite comical, then turned into something very serious.
Yeah.
And we are indeed in the age of the nitwits. And you are concerned quite rightly about people gluing their buttocks to the hard shoulder of the M25 or whichever chosen motorway it is today. But I'm just as concerned about Mr. Johnson gluing his buttocks to the Prime Minister's chair in the Cabinet room. Because he has swallowed whole the entire agenda of the Green Zealots, and he pumps it out in speeches and he puts it into law. And ever since Parliament passed with, I think, 2 votes against the Climate Change Act, this country has been pursuing a policy of national suicide. What I've said, and I'll stick to this, is that there's no point arguing against the people who advocate this because they don't argue. They are. It's as pointless as it would be to argue against the Spanish Inquisition. All they want to do to anybody who opposes them is to burn them at the stake with a carbon-free stake with carbon-free fuel. So I wouldn't actually, while burning, increase the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's pointless arguing with them. I don't even know if they're right or wrong. I don't try anymore. But I simply point out the things which are happening thanks to their policies, which even on their own terms do not make sense.
No.
Particularly the destruction of Britain's coal-burning power capacity, which is immediately cancelled out by the enormous and fantastic, colossal, super califragilistic, whatever it is, development of coal-powered power stations by the Chinese. So it doesn't make any difference. And then there is the other problem we face, which is that we really do need some sort of steady power supply in this country on which we can rely. And the only one which would get past the scrutiny of the bottom-gluing fanatics is nuclear power.
Yeah.
And we ought to be building it. And I looked it up the other day. I've been advocating this specifically since 2006, when I pointed out that we waste billions of pounds on maintaining a Cold War superpower nuclear deterrent when we're not a superpower and the Cold War is over. And if we really want to maintain our independence, not least from Russia, and defend ourselves from political threats from Russia, we'd be much, much more wise and practical if we built independent nuclear power stations, a large fleet of them, which enabled us to withstand the gas shortages and the shortages of wind and the permanent shortage of sunshine, which for some reason afflicts these islands.
Yes.
But nothing, whatever, has happened, except that we retire nuclear power stations or are preparing to retire them, and we make deals with the Chinese to build vast nuclear power stations, which I suspect will never be finished. And we don't adopt the much more sensible policy of building quite a lot of small ones, which can be bought pretty much off the shelf without anything like the fuss, because we won't resolve ourselves into any policy. If we've got to accept this, the Green Zealots are in charge of everything, and I think we have, because any voice raised against them is immediately flattened, then that's what we should be doing as a country if we have any sense. No sign of it.
Well, this is the thing, and I mean, I have to say there was sort of peak incredulity from my point of view last week when Boris Johnson goes all the way to America to address the United Nations and have a sort of summit meeting with Joe Biden about climate change, even as we are running out of energy and we don't have enough wind energy because there's not enough wind. We don't have enough gas because we didn't store any of it. You know, petrol seems to be in short supply because we don't have enough HGV drivers. And you think to yourself, you know, when the campaign against CO2 has reached its peak, we then find that we haven't got enough CO2 to actually operate the country. And you go, there's something slightly bizarre going on here.
It is beyond satire, but then this country has for a long time been beyond satire. But let us respond rationally and say, all right, these conditions prevail. It was a grave political mistake to close the rough field in which we store natural gas. It should be put right. It was a mistake to close down coal-fired power, and it should be put right by building more nuclear stations, or indeed more natural gas stations. Those, although they're very popular with governments at the moment, are actually great producers of CO2 and are by no means carbon neutral, let alone the banks of diesel generators we now use to save our electrical bacon quite often, apparently.
Yeah.
So, but if you want to say, right, we're going to we're going to fit in with this green agenda. We're not going to increase our carbon footprint, but we're going to have stable power. Then nuclear power stations has to be it. But there's no rationality. Again, when the HGV drivers shortage, it doesn't take much research to find out there are several reasons for this. It afflicts quite a lot of countries in the European Union. And there's no doubt at all that part of the reason for it is our exit from the EU. Drivers and vehicles, indeed, can no longer easily cross into this country, and we have lost some capacity as a result, and quite a lot of speed of delivery as well. It's ludicrous to pretend this isn't happening. But other things are very important as well. For instance, the Inland Revenue's decision to pretty much prevent people from claiming to be self-employed and to demand that they are employed and pay the higher taxes involved has put a lot of people off driving.
Yeah.
The conditions in which people have to put up with the driving, most of us would not put up with them. You're away from home for a long time. There's nowhere decent to stay. It's often not terribly safe. And the pay is not very good. So these things need to be sorted out as well. And the other thing, which has contributed hugely to this, is the government response to COVID and the resulting staying at home of large numbers of people who've discovered they don't much like the jobs they used to do.
Interestingly enough,
actually, they won't go back to them.
Well, the other issues,
which is a huge problem, which afflicts everything, and particularly, by the way, afflicts the civil service, which is operating, I should think, at about 1/10 of its previous not very great efficiency, because they cannot be persuaded to go back to the office where all the records and stuff are, which enable them to work properly.
Yeah. No, I've been speaking to people over the last couple of weeks. In fact, I alerted everyone to the fact that the DVLA was not working terribly well about a month ago, before any of this happened, because now any request that you put to the DVLA takes a minimum of 3 to 4 months to come back. And to try and renew an HGV license is taking as long as 10 months at the moment, because everybody's working from home. And you've also...
it's curious. Maybe that's so. I had a recent experience with the DVLA, which was the opposite of that. I was amazed at the speed with which they responded to a license renewal. But so I can only speak as I find. I'm sure that what you say is true, but it strikes me that the section which is concerned with this is one which is in trouble.
Yeah.
But in any case, no department can work as well with a lot of its people working from home as it does with them all working in the office as they should. And it's time people went back to work. And these things all go together. The fuel shortage is very peculiar. It seems to have been brought into being by a leak.
Yes.
Who leaked it and why has to be one of the big political questions of our time. But once it's perfectly true, once people have started to panic, there's nothing you can do about it. I think actually they should sell piles of lavatory paper at petrol stations so that people can be spared panic about that.
Well, actually, people
need to start queuing now for the new Bond film.
Well, exactly right. I mean, one of the things that was actually rather smart that one of the fuel companies did was to immediately impose a £30 top end ceiling on how much fuel you could get. And as far as I know, because I happened to stop at one on the way home yesterday from Sussex because there was no queue, it means there's people that don't queue up, because you don't queue up if you can only get £30 worth of fuel, which proves that the people queuing up probably didn't really need to.
Yeah, doesn't that tell you something about the price of fuel, that £30 of fuel isn't worth queuing up for?
Yeah, well, exactly right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the steps can be taken, but then you get people can turn quite nasty, can't they?
Oh, well, there were punch-ups, there were people fighting.
Saying no.
I don't understand what I've said this to you before, though, Peter, that I'm really quite concerned about this rather headlong kind of almost stampede to consumerism now, because it's gone beyond just wanting to have everything. And I wonder if it's about the expansion of credit. I wonder if it's because people don't appear to be any wealthier necessarily than they were 10 years ago. But people seem to have everything, and they have to have it now. You have to order it on Amazon and get it tomorrow. You can't just have, one phone. You have to have all sorts of other bits and pieces as well. You have to have 25 different kinds of cereal. You have to have all sorts of different forms of pasta.
It is. I remember when I went to live in the United States, the huge variety of things which you didn't need or want in the supermarkets.
Yeah.
There's 30 or 40 different kinds of cereal instead of 5 or 6. And you get used to it rather remarkably quickly. But I think this is actually a subject people don't like to talk about, but I think it's one of the features of the collapse of religion in our society. What do people believe in? There's extraordinary cults almost cargo cults of consumer goods that you absolutely have to have. The one most mystifying to me has always been the one for what I call gym shoes, trainers, insisting that they have to be box fresh and a certain make and type. You must have been to Las Vegas, where apart from all the gambling, there are almost temples to all the big fashion brands.
Yes.
Standing, they look like temples, as if it's a form of worship. There is something wrong with it, but the power of advertising in our society is so huge, from product placement on television programs and in films to the endless, relentless promotion of things. And I always recommend to people they should read a very brief, very witty, clever book by Vance Packard called The Hidden Persuaders, which explains just how much effort has been devoted by how many very, very clever people to form our minds and form our tastes. And what the book, written in the mid-50s, ends with a warning that, which of course has been completely borne out, that these techniques are now going to be applied to politics.
Yeah. They plainly are. They plainly have been during COVID with some of the advertising that even we carry on our station, which is all about, can you look somebody in the eyes and tell them that you haven't been vaccinated?
And it's brilliant. It works. And all this stuff, let's do this, is the new slogan.
Yes.
Let's, not you must, or it's let's do this. We're all doing it together. Let's go. This, that, and the other. But it's not just that. It's actually persuading people. The New Labour, for instance, was an advertising man's creation, beyond doubt.
Yes.
It was as ridiculous as instant mashed potato, one of the most unnecessary products ever produced. only worse. I mean, ultimately, instant mashed potato doesn't do you any harm, whereas New Labour, I think, did quite a lot.
Well, they did, and they also then morphed into blue conservatism, didn't they?
Well, or pink conservatism, or whatever colour you want to give to it. Yes, the Conservative Party is now the New Labour Party. Yeah. That's Keir Starmer's big problem. His occupation's gone.
His Technicolor dream coat's been stolen.
Yeah, the job of leading New Labour has been taken over by, of all people, Alexander Pfeffel Boris Johnson.
Yes.
He does it, it seems to me, remarkably well. He is the heir to Blair.
He really is.
Much more effective heir to Blair than David Cameron was, who tried to be.
Right, exactly right. Let's speak about the atheism-Christianity debate, because I see that you were writing about Worcester College at the weekend.
Yeah.
What's been going on there?
Well, there was a Christian conference there, and I don't know what happened at this conference. I wasn't there, and the people who were there aren't talking. It may be that some of those there had views which quite a lot of people might find a bit hard going, but then Christianity examined closely is quite hard going. But that's not the point.
Well, as long as you're not Archbishop Welby, he doesn't seem to believe much in Christianity.
When returning students came to the building, they found traces of this conference. Some leaflet had been left lying around. They said, "Good heavens, this terrible thing has happened. There have been Christians in our college," as if they discovered a plague of cockroaches or locusts or something. And everybody then apologized and said how terrible. We've actually had Christians in the college, of all things, for goodness sake, Christians in a college at Oxford University. And my suggestion was, okay, well, it happens to be the case that Oxford University is a Christian foundation in all characteristics. All the colleges have chapels. They were all originally set up to teach the Christian religion. So it's slightly ridiculous to get so upset about it. But if we have now reached the point where Christianity is now offensive to people, why don't they conduct an exorcism ceremony? All get themselves up in black robes and hoods, go around chanting "Imagine," and spraying the place with sanitizer to drive away all traces of Christianity, using some unholy water as well. Yeah. Why don't you just admit it? Why don't places like Oxford University and all the other parts of Britain, which are supposedly still officially Christian, say, right, okay, that's over. We're getting rid of it. We don't believe in this stuff anymore. And then people might find out what a post-Christian society really looks like.
Because I don't think it would be entirely out of the ordinary in this day and age if you were to sign up at Worcester College as a student and say, the thing is, I'm a bit of a Satanist and I'd like to have a special Aleister Crowley commemoration service every Sunday evening, at which we would probably sacrifice something, but just pretend. They'd probably say that was fine, but you can't have a Christian conference.
As long as it was perhaps they could sacrifice a vegan sausage roll.
Yes, something like that.
So it wasn't anything alive. I think maybe you would actually get not just permission, but enthusiastic support. I think there are isn't there a Satanist in one of the armed services, a Satanist chaplain?
There might be. I don't know.
If there isn't yet, there will be soon. I mean, I would rather hope there would be a Satanist chaplain aboard our nuclear missile submarines.
Well, one would hope so.
What better place for it?
But it does seem as though we have reached this point where it's government by, very, very temporary measure. Let's not bother doing anything. I mean, everything that we're talking about now, the HGV shortage, the energy crisis, the fuel problem, the worry about nuclear power, it's all as a result of no government really, literally in the last 10 to 15 years, really making any long-term plans for anything.
Well, they haven't got any. They don't know what sort of society they want this to be. And the problem with Britain is for a very long time it's been drifting dead in the water because it's still technically a constitutional monarchy, a vestigially Christian country, a country of more or less Western values, but most of its governing class, a lot of its media and its education sector don't believe in this stuff anymore. And so many of the things, one of the reasons for our education system being so terrible is that it's halfway between. The revolutionaries wanted to turn it into a totally left-wing egalitarian education system, but they failed to do so. And as a result, it's neither one thing nor the other, and the schools don't work. Whereas in properly revolutionary countries, and one of the reasons why we had so many, for instance, Polish people coming over to work here is that after the communists took over, they created very efficient education in the image of the sort of society they wanted. And people came out of the schools certainly very well educated in the sort of skills which made them employable, which we can't do anymore. Half the problem in this country is we produce huge numbers of people who are pretty much unemployable because the schools are so bad. And that's one of the symptoms of the drift. We are neither the country we used to be, nor are we the country the revolutionaries fully want us to be. So everything is directionless and a mess. And the country is run along the lines of Gramscian Euro-communism by an old Etonian who thinks he's a conservative. So you can imagine how confusing it must be in his head.
Well, you can imagine also how exciting it's going to be in 3 days' time when the furlough comes to an end. And you have, of course, been very outspoken about furlough and how there would be a terrible price to pay. But you won't be surprised to know, Peter, that it's being hailed a great success. I'm not quite sure what the measure is, but when it does come to an end, you'll hear lots of people saying how brilliant it was.
Well, I wonder, it really is very difficult to tell how big an effect it's going to have when it comes to an end. And I'm reserving judgment finally. Obviously, one hopes that people will go back to work and full-time employment and the things they used to do. I really wish that the damage of the past 18 months should be as little as possible. I can't help thinking that a lot of people will find at the end of this that they're no longer employed, and at the same time, a lot of people will find that the end of the boost to universal credit will be very hard to take, and they won't be able to make ends meet. I think there's lots of bad things being stored up at the moment, but I think let's wait, hope that the end of furlough won't be as bad as I feared it would be.
No.
Who would wish on anybody the end of a job which they relied on?
But it has subsidised apparently 2.3 billion working days, and I'm still meeting people even now who have gone back to work sort of this week for the first time since a year ago in March. I find it extraordinary.
Well, it is odd because you and I went. You don't think you ever stopped, and I
No.
left the office for a few weeks, and then realised that there was nothing to stop me going back. But yeah, it is extraordinary. I remember when I was an industrial correspondent, that half the stories we wrote were about the disastrous loss of working days as a result of strikes. But they were mere pimples compared with the loss of working days, which has been brought about by this. And I keep being told, no, it won't cost anything. No, you can borrow limitless money. And no, there won't be any inflation. Well, that one's turning out pretty fast not to be true. And no, there won't be any tax rises. Well, that one's also turning out pretty fast not to be true. And no, there won't be any unemployment. Well, we'll see about that. Of course, no, there won't be any bad effect on the NHS. Well, nobody even pretends anymore that the NHS hasn't been completely shattered in many ways by the shutdown.
I mean, could it be, call me old-fashioned, but could it be that one of the reasons we're short of people in various different sectors, short of people to do jobs in certain sectors, is because people have got rather used to not doing anything?
I'm sure it is. If you pay people not to do things, if you pay people to stay at home, then they will naturally get used to it. And for a lot of people who don't particularly like their work, and many people, it's true, don't particularly like their work and never have, to be given the opportunity to be paid for not doing it, or to be paid for staying at home, it must have been a sort of paradise. And it's going to be very hard for them to bring it to an end. And one sympathises, but there it is. This could never have been sustained limitlessly.
No.
People talk about cloud cuckoo land all the time, the old cliche, but actually this was cloud cuckoo land. It was a place of fantasy, and now it has to come to an end, and we have to pay the price for it.
Yeah.
I hope it isn't too high.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. Peter, great to talk to you again. Thank you very much indeed. Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens there.